HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents It Takes Monsters by Mandy Mchugh. Read by Picard. 1. It was a beautiful Friday in October when Victoria Tate decided to murder her husband. Standing over the sink with a mug of coffee, she watched the morning unravel on their quiet cul-de-sac. The idea had been floating around her mind for years, if she was being honest. Nestled and familiar, like old curtains flapping in the breeze. Not that Warren suspected anything, of course. Why would he? She'd never given him a reason to doubt her loyalty. She was his second in command, his adoring wife. He was the boss, the CEO, and the title chafed her. A little voice whispered that what she was planning was wrong, a sin. Victoria hadn't gone to church in a long time, but she was pretty sure that if God didn't want her to kill her husband, then he wouldn't have made him such a prick. Once upon a time, she'd believed those 3 letters would be attached to her name. She was a force at Livingston Corporation, thriving. From lassoing big-ticket clients to negotiating contracts that would make Mark Cuban cry, Victoria proved time and time again that not only did she belong at the dinner table, but that she was hosting the entire goddamn meal. It should have been a no-brainer. Then, stupidly, she'd married Warren. It was what everyone had expected her to do, regardless of her accolades. She was a Livingston. Livingston women got married and had babies. Victoria thought she could be different. She could have the husband and the home in Kentwood Manor and the successful career. She didn't have to choose. Her father had owned Livingston, after all. Nepotism aside, she was the best at what she did. She thought he would understand. How wrong she had been. 10 years down the road, and Warren wanted to dump her like yesterday's garbage. He didn't want out of the marriage. That would be too simple. She almost wished divorce was on the table. Instead, he wanted her dignity, one of the defining characteristics that made Victoria Tate who she was. "We're running out of time. A few years is all I'm asking for, Vic," he'd said. "A family could be good for us. It could be good for you. The sabbatical forms will be on your desk in the morning. We can clean out your office together and figure out a solution. For your accounts, for a nursery. All of it. Trust me, Vic. This is what you want." He'd smiled, like the matter had already been decided. She guessed in his mind it had been. Black and white was kind of his thing. Warren wanted a kid. Victoria was going to give him one. End of story. Having a child was not the issue. She had nothing against children or women who made it their life's goal to be the perfect mother. It was simply that Victoria had no clue if she wanted to be one of them. Wasn't she supposed to know? Wasn't every woman ingrained with some biological pull once they reached a certain age? Victoria didn't feel a maternal tug, but she didn't have the luxury of pondering what that meant. Warren was taking away her choice. Victoria couldn't wrap her head around his logic. Warren hadn't interacted with a kid since the Children's Hospital fundraiser dinner the previous year, and that had solely been for the photo op. He wasn't going to leave his job. He wouldn't sacrifice his early morning golf outings or late-night meetings for a screaming newborn. He most certainly wouldn't throw a burp cloth over his YSL button-down, let alone change a diaper. That would fall to Victoria. And how was that fair? She loved her life the way it was. She loved her independence. A child would change all of that. Acknowledging her misgivings didn't make her a bad person. It made her rational, practical. Warren, on the other hand. How could he be so callous? Blindly assume that she'd drop her clients for a car seat? How could he take everything from her without even asking for her input? It wasn't like he'd have to endure the physical changes, the hormonal swings, the delivery. She wasn't some empty vessel waiting to be filled. They were supposed to be partners, in love and in labor. Pun intended. But Warren's declaration that she was leaving Livingston and she was having his child had confirmed her long-held suspicions. He didn't see her as an equal. He didn't see her at all. She gripped the mug hard enough to feel the ceramic crack, and then forced herself to relax. She didn't lose control of her emotions often, but this morning she was finding it difficult to maintain her composure. Anyone would, Victoria thought. It wasn't every day that a person's entire world shifted. The life she'd constructed teetered on the brink of an abyss. She and Warren skirted the edge in a dark dance for power. Like hell was she going to be the one to fall in. 2. On a normal Friday, Victoria would finish her coffee, shower, and head to the office. Her meetings would wrap up, her accounts would be balanced, and she'd finalize her schedule for the upcoming week. Most often, her day would be punctuated by a scoop of chocolate chip cookie dough and whatever true crime documentary Netflix suggested for her, while Warren indulged in whiskey. Today, however, she wasn't going to work. Not when she'd have to sit in front of an HR rep and sign her life away. Warren would be mad, but she couldn't bring herself to care about that. She was mad, too. Setting her cup aside, Victoria tucked the front of her shirt into her jeans and slipped into her Sperry's. She grabbed her keys with a quick glance at the mirror over the foyer table. One low ponytail later, and the bored housewife starter kit was complete. Cookie-cutter chic. Easily forgettable. Exactly the vibe she was going for. She was ready. The ordinary morning happenings of Kentwood Manor were in full swing by the time she reversed out of the driveway. Neighbors collecting the local paper in their robes. Parents exchanging small talk at the bus stop. Would she be one of them? Victoria wondered. She would be. Right? She would have to be. Coordinating outfits with the other mothers and Pinteresting bento box lunch ideas. Nope. Victoria squashed that train of thought before it derailed into a full-blown panic attack. Despite the chill, Joe Waterman's landscaper, Ted, was already mowing the lawn, nodding along to whatever music blasted through his ridiculously large headphones. Rashad Banks, in his navy blue base sharkskin suit, buffed a spot from his Mercedes M-Class. He winked as she passed, which drew a smile in return. He was handsome, and he knew it. Had that whole BDE thing going for him, which was a popular topic of discussion in the neighborhood book club. Victoria used that term loosely. A group of horny middle-aged women drinking wine and drooling over smut while their kids were at school was a more accurate description. Warren wanted her to be one of them. She shuddered. The Sparrows, retired busybodies with too much time on their hands, rocked in Adirondack chairs and waved, big dopey smiles glued to their Florida-weathered faces like an ad for a prescription drug. Near the end of the street, Betty Naughtier, resplendent in neon leggings and matching sneakers, pumped her arms like a shadow boxer, lips pursed in exertion. "Morning," she called. "You look ridiculous," Victoria said through ventriloquist teeth and gave a beauty queen-worthy wave. Normal. Predictable. Just another glorious morning in Kentwood Manor. At the development entrance, Victoria turned left instead of her usual right, heading away from the city into the rural landscape that comprised the other half of Kentwood County. Back roads and farmland opening before her, she found her favorite true crime podcast and tuned out, letting her thoughts wander to the details of crime scenes and forensic mistakes. Cornstalks whipped by while the host dissected facts about fibers, soil samples, and genetic material under fingernails. Victoria examined her own manicure, a sensible length with a neutral color. Warren didn't like flashy. Flashy didn't win deals. Or change diapers. A burn settled deep in her chest. She imagined her fingers digging into his neck, nails pink and pretty against his reddening flesh, collecting his genetic material in the struggle. That wouldn't do. Victoria would be smarter. She wouldn't leave evidence. She would wear gloves, she thought, parking in front of Miller's Hardware. Just in case. 3. The hardware store screamed of nostalgia and reeked of sawdust and gasoline. Vintage metal signs advertised soda and car services. The shelves were made of thick wooden planks, worn from years of use. It was cute. Quaint. Best of all, it had no security cameras. "Help you?" asked the man behind the cashier's desk. White hair stuck out from his stained baseball cap, but wiry muscles stretched beneath his gray thermal shirt. Working man's muscles. Something Warren would never have. He'd slip a disc lifting a bag of potatoes. Okay, that was a little bit bitchy, she thought, looking at her own arms. She guessed the same could be said of her. Pilates toned, but not strong by any means. It wasn't like she was lugging hay bales in the afternoon sun. Honesty, like good and evil, like everything else, was arbitrary. "Drop cloths?" Victoria asked. "And some leaf backs, if you still have them." "Yeah, we got 'em." He stuck out a gnarled thumb and hitched it to the right. "2 rows back for both. If you hit the nails, you've gone too far. Hard to miss, though." She thanked him and moved quickly past the rows of tools and appliances. The plastic drop cloths were piled in wire baskets at the end of the aisle. She grabbed 2 rolls, paused, took 2 more, 3, 4, and a few rolls of painter's tape. Items secured, she skirted the corner and found lawn bags stacked on an end cap. Perfect. She added 2 big boxes to her pile of Dexter-level spatter-proofing and headed for the register. The man stood at the counter wiping black grease from his hands with an equally blackened washcloth. "All set?" he asked, dropping the cloth into a bin at his feet. She placed the last of the items on the small counter. "Yes, thank you." "Find everything okay?" "Yes, thank you," she repeated. He tallied up the prices on scrap paper and entered them into the register. "We don't accept credit cards here, ma'am. Just so you know. Never did care much for those big companies. The fees'll suck you dry." That's fine. It was why she'd gone to Miller's in the first place. Hopefully that was the last of the small talk. "Doing a little home improvement?" he asked with a chuckle as the bell above the door jingled. She nodded. Something like that. "Victoria?" a voice squawked behind her. "Oh my God, what a small world. I was just thinking about you." Shit. Betty Nadir, neon queen of the speedwalkers. She was still wearing her blindingly bright athletic wear, but she'd exchanged her runners for a pair of day-glow Crocs. "Betty," she said, "so good to see you." They exchanged a quick hug and a cheek kiss. That woman was all about the cheek kisses. Victoria struggled not to swipe the ghost of spit from her face. Betty's cloyingly sweet perfume hung heavy in the air between them. "What are you doing here?" she asked, all big-toothed and wide-eyed, shouldering her oversized purse with the grace of a donkey. "Just picking up a few things." The cashier clucked his tongue, inserting himself into the conversation. "Looks like it's gonna snow tonight," he said. "Early this year." "Ugh, how do you find the time?" Betty mooned, ignoring him with a pointed eyebrow arch. "I need some of your motivation. If you could bottle it up for me, that'd be great, because if I worked half as much as you did, I'd be a slob kebab by happy hour. And you're painting again? Didn't you just have the trim done? I remember seeing the utility vans outside your house for a few days." Victoria didn't miss the disapproving frown. God forbid the unsightly work vans parked on the street. She'd probably been watching to make sure they left before the HOA cutoff, with a bag of low-calorie popcorn and a seltzer. "We did, yeah, but they missed some sections," she said with a smile that she hoped looked more natural than it felt. "Then they should come fix it." Betty scrunched up her nose in faux outrage. "Who did you use? I'm sure if you let them know you're dissatisfied with the work, they'd come back." "Call me a perfectionist," she said. "I don't want to rely on someone else to do the job right. Details are important." Yes, they are." Victoria didn't appreciate the Mona Lisa smirk that accompanied Betty's agreement. "Well," she said, motioning toward the register. "Hey, did you hear about the Mahonies?" she asked, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Not the Sherman Ave Mahonies, the Edgewood Court Mahonies, the ones with the yapping dog. They petitioned the board to install an above-ground pool. Can you believe it? I mean, it's clearly against the rules, but they're arguing they should get an exemption for health reasons." Health reasons? He eats a sausage McMuffin every morning, and he wants to talk about health? I told Fiona, I said, "Oh, for Christ's sake," Victoria thought. "I'm sure everything will be fine, Betty." Betty's energy furled inward in a mixture of confusion and rejection. "I'm sorry to cut this short, but I should get going if I want to get this done before the snow." She really did not want to gossip in front of the cashier, who was eyeing them both with more than a fair share of judgment. Nothing drew attention faster than conflict. She'd have to keep that in mind. "Of course. Don't let me keep you. We'll get a drink soon, all right?" "Sure. I'll check my calendar and get back to you." "You do that." Betty grasped Victoria's forearm and squeezed twice. "Send my best to Warren." With a flip of her dried, sweaty ponytail, she sauntered away. Well, shit, she thought. So much for keeping a low profile. 4. Leaves whipped around the parking lot in crisp, rusty arcs. The temperature seemed to have dropped 10 degrees since she had left the house, the wind raising goosebumps on her arms. October snow wasn't uncommon in upstate New York, but that didn't mean she had to like it, or the potential complications such a storm would bring to her plans. The weather wasn't her only obstacle, however. "Freaking Betty Naughtier," Victoria mumbled, retrieving the car key. She popped the trunk and dropped everything inside unceremoniously before sliding into the driver's seat. What were the odds of running into her obnoxious neighbor? Of all the places and times. She could have easily hit the Home Depot closer to the manor. As much as Betty advocated the shop local mentality, she hadn't met a chain store she could say no to. Why Miller's? Maybe she had a legitimate errand. Or maybe she was sticking her neon-colored bloodhound nose where it didn't belong. It wouldn't be the first time. Controlled chaos was Betty's specialty. It hadn't been a year since her last drama unfolded, when she'd inserted herself into the nighttime activities of her next-door neighbors. George had been having an affair. Stacy had been in denial. Betty had been curious. She took to following George and eventually caught him leaving his girlfriend's house. Sex hair be damned. The photos she posted to the Facebook HOA page spoke volumes. Victoria watched the mess from afar, but concluded that the entire scandal said more about the kind of person Betty was than anything that happened between George and Stacy. Victoria, however, had no desire to be the new featured drama on Next Door. She started the next episode of My Favorite Murder and pulled out of the lot, tapping erratically on the wheel. Each mile tightened the notch of tension in her shoulders. Face flush and skin warm, she rolled down the windows and gulped mouthfuls of cool air until the drowning sensation passed. Of course she was on edge, she told herself. It would be weird if she wasn't. People didn't off their spouses every day. But she could do this. She would do this. Not because she was born a Livingston and had some medieval birthright claim to the company, although there was some truth there. Not out of some ill-conceived notion that women belonged on top, as much as she believed in the feminist quest for equality. Murdering Warren didn't fall under that umbrella. It was the injustice of the situation. The fact that one man could sweep in with his dick-swinging energy and demand she bend a knee, in order to give up her body, her freedom, her choice. If Warren had broached the topic beforehand, maybe Victoria would have considered his point of view. As a courtesy. She wasn't unreasonable. She wasn't a monster. And even if she wasn't 100% convinced that motherhood was right for her, she would have been willing to listen. A few years. She would be a relic by then, professionally speaking. As much as she hated to admit it, men could leave the game and be welcomed back with open arms. 2 martini lunches never went out of style. Most women weren't given the same treatment, especially after a maternity leave, when the inherent assumption was that she would have to drop everything for a child. Had some places made progress? Sure. But Victoria was under no illusion that Livingston was one of them, not with her father setting the precedent for Warren. She could kick and claw her way back in, but it wouldn't be enough. Victoria pressed the Bluetooth button on the wheel. Maybe her sister could offer deeper insight. Call Tegan. After 4 rings, the recording began. You've reached the voicemail of Dr. Tegan Livingston. I'm unable to take your call right now, but... It's your personal phone, Teagues. Why are you introducing yourself like a quack on an infomercial, you colossal narcissist? Knowing Tegan, she was probably watching the screen and waiting for the call to end. Then she'd wait a few extra minutes before texting a response. Sorry, I was busy grafting someone's face back on because I'm a doctor, in case you forgot, doing doctor things. What's up? A plastic surgeon. It's barely a doctor, Victoria said, smug in her dismissal. Well-respected doctor or not, Tegan was decidedly insecure when it came to Victoria's opinion. She tried to hide it behind follower counts and celebrity name-dropping, but it carried a note of desperation. Tegan craved her approval, and part of Victoria, one that she tried not to look at too closely, loved not giving it to her. Did that make her petty? Perhaps. But for the first time in her life, Victoria couldn't find it in herself to care. 5. Victoria stacked the Miller's Haul on the table. Insides jittery, chest tight. Her hands were steady as she gripped the counter. She was making the right call. This was the only course of action. Nerves were normal. Her phone whistled, startling her out of the internal pep talk. The world didn't stop because she was facing the biggest moment of her life. Money was pushed, clients were irritated, and business kept moving. 16 new emails since she checked this morning, all from her VIP list. She may not be CEO, but Livingston couldn't function without her. She shook her head and tapped the first message from Jeff Blevins, the ever-present thorn in her side. Account execs weren't supposed to keep tabs on each other's client lists, but Jeff had been trying to poach from her for the last 3 years. Ever since Warren had picked him for a prestigious leadership summit, where all the major players went to schmooze and pat themselves on the back. Of course, it hadn't been Victoria. They couldn't possibly risk having the team accuse him of nepotism. Her numbers drew enough speculation as it was. Jeff was the obvious choice. And here he was, emailing her before business hours about one of her clients. "Heard this through the grapevine," he wrote. "Thought you'd want to know." How altruistic. Gratuzzi and McLeod, her biggest account, had decided to jump ship. 3 years she'd spent building a relationship, nurturing a meager one-off service fee into insane profit margins. And now? They were citing customer service issues as their reason to withdraw from their arrangement and go with Livingston's biggest competitor. Customer service? Code for bullshit. Victoria could read the red between the lines. It had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that Warren insisted he handle the last round of negotiations, or how he'd inexplicably transferred them to a subpar service team where more than half the reps were in their first 3 months of employment and knew nothing about the systems. Livingston had already lost 2 of its most lucrative accounts this month, and before Warren had dropped the surprise you're being ousted baby bomb, she hadn't blamed them for leaving. Big fish always smelled trouble first. They'd been able to hide the departures, at least temporarily, from the shareholders, mostly because Victoria knew how to smooth the rough edges of desperation. There wasn't a chance in hell the facade would stay intact for another quarter. Also, it wasn't a good look that Jeff had found out about this before she did. "Shit," she said, shooting off a few quick responses to frazzled account execs that she would circle back after the weekend with a fresh game plan. She wouldn't have to make up for Warren's slack for much longer. Not if her plan worked. As the last email sent, an alert for a calendar change popped up on the screen. This can't be happening, she thought, reviewing the notification. Everyone wanted to be wildly unpredictable today, it seemed. Wasn't like she had a murder to execute. Victoria pulled up her call log and tapped Warren's name. No answer, which was odd. For all his ineptitude, Warren didn't miss her calls, especially when he was supposed to be free until his dinner meeting. She hung up and tried again. This time, the call went straight to voicemail. Was Warren ignoring her? Well, that wasn't going to fly. She swiped to her contacts and hit the main line. "Livingston Corporation? How may I direct your call?" Warren's secretary, Judy, a comely woman with a small gap between her front 2 teeth and a penchant for ramen, crooned into the speaker. "Hi, Judy, it's Victoria." "Mrs. Tate, how are you?" "I'm well, thanks," she said, driving straight to the point. "My calendar just updated, and I was hoping you could confirm the change. What's going on with the Harvest Gala? The RSVP was for next weekend." "It was supposed to be," she said. "What happened?" "Oh, it's awful," Judy said, frown evident in her voice. "Margaret's mother has taken a turn for the worse, I'm afraid. They were hoping for good news, but her last test results weren't great. So they bumped it to tonight in case Margaret needs to make arrangements." Margaret Connors. The Kentwood socialite. She and her ridiculous husband, Barnaby, lived in a mega mansion on a private cul-de-sac at the other, filthy, richer end of Kentwood Manor. For anyone else, rescheduling an event of such magnitude with no notice would be impossible. But for Margaret Connors, the proud stay-at-home wife who ultimately controlled Barnaby's wallet, the city would move Christmas to June if it meant the cash flow continued. "I didn't know her mother was still alive," Victoria said. "She's never come up in conversation." "Well, she won't be for much longer," Judy said before immediately backtracking. "I apologize, Mrs. Tate. That was incredibly crass of me." "No worries," she said. "Neither will Warren." Judy's voice lowered to a conspiratorial level. Victoria could almost see her twirling a strand of her copper waves as she divulged the news. "One of their housekeepers told me she has cancer, stage 4 in her pancreas. Terrible, right? Margaret is completely torn up. She wanted to fly her up from Long Island, but she's too weak to be moved, so they've hired the entire staff of a private practice to give her round-the-clock care. Margaret's taking the jet down first thing in the morning and plans to stay, but she refused to cancel the gala. So it's tonight.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?